Okay, Mike Benoit here again, doing a little tyranny busting. We're busting some of that tyranny that's upon the mind of man and those who put it on the mind of man. Today it's a Facebook comment Larken Rose made, and the comments to his comment. So here we go. I'm going to read the first paragraph of what he posted and then make a comment. He says, it's clear that the limits of what government is allowed to do as far as the general public is concerned are not based on any principle whatsoever. One reason people throughout the world and throughout history have been so slow to resist tyranny is that as long as the growth of tyranny is slow and steady, the tyrants are never seen as having crossed the line. This is because without any underlying principles by which to gauge right and wrong, there can be no line to cross. Now right there, I'd find 100% agreement with him if he just left it at that. I think Jefferson talked about that in the Declaration of Independence. Of course, he said it more eloquently. But so Rose really nailed it right here. Then he undoes what he did, the good that he did, and goes off the deep end in all ends of the pool. He says the belief in authority, he's got authority in quotes, is completely incompatible with any moral principles. Now, I guess one would have to say, what does he mean about the belief in authority? And see, this is so wide open and so general that you could find examples where it fits. You know, those people that are so down the intellectual ladder that whatever those in charge say we got to do, if that's what he means, the belief in authority, that basically they don't question it, they don't fight against it, and he might be right here, but to say the belief in authority, and he says the belief, so using that term, you should use the term, then there's another term that one can use in the respect for authority when the authority is operating under the granted powers. But he says the belief in authority is completely incompatible with any moral principles. Now, these absolute statements, when you take a look at it, and let's say you define the authority as following principles, moral principles, and you believe in that kind of authority, then it's not incompatible with moral principles. So it's a false statement. Then he goes on, precisely because the essence of the belief is the idea that those in authority are bound by the same rules as their subjects. Okay, of course that isn't what we have today. But if we had a system, I guess the Roman Republic was pretty much like that, but no system is 100% like that, because as you know, people in authority that have power, they get corrupted, and if they have absolute power, they get absolute corruption. But to say that the subjects ever feel, to say that precisely because the essence of the belief is the idea that those in authority are bound by the same rules of conduct as their subjects. Well, the belief that they're bound by the same rules is more strongly put is that the contention that they're bound by the same rules, and then to say as their subjects, as their masters, really. When the people are in control of the government, they are the masters, not the subjects. So he throws all these terms in there. It's almost like when a bunch of people get together and form a union, they're in control of the union. The union is their servant. But as some time goes on, the union takes control and they become the masters and not the servants. So it's a flip. But in this thing here, to to label those people with the authority as the subjects, or as the masters of their subjects. And so those people that put those people in authority are the subjects. That's an inverted system. That's a perverted system. And that's not the system that was established by our Constitution. So logically, now he goes on logically, how could the subjects ever feel justified in dictating standards of behavior to their masters? Well, see, he's got that ass backwards again. The government agents are supposed to be the servants, not the masters. Now, if they take control, who's to blame? The servants or the masters? And us being the masters. If we allow the servants to reverse the roles and they become the masters, who's to blame for that? I go on and I say, I cut in here, there are those who believe in authority and they expect authority to be subject to the same rules as they are. Now he's saying that anybody with belief in authority is completely the belief in authority is completely incompatible with any moral principles. And anybody, and precisely because the essence of the belief is the idea that those in authority are bound by the same rules as their subject. This stuff gets convoluted. The belief in authority, let's go through it again. The belief in authority is completely incompatible with any moral principles, according to Larken Rose. So when he's using that term belief, you know, if I give the guards on my property authority to guard the property, and they some issue comes up, and whether or not they did their job properly, because I believe in the authority that I granted to them, that's incompatible with any moral principle? I don't think so. All right, so because this is convoluted, so he goes, logically, how could the subjects ever feel justified in dictating standards of behavior to their masters? Well, that's the problem. We have a system of government where we're the masters and not the subjects. And there's been plenty of governments out there where people were the subjects of the masters. So how could this calling them the subjects and asking them a question and referring to the other guys as the masters is assuming that that's the way it's supposed to be, and that isn't the way it's supposed to be. So the bottom line is there are those who believe in authority and they expect authority to be subject to the same rules they are. And if taxation, and he calls it forced confiscation or wealth, taxation is not forced confiscation of wealth if the taxation is for a service that can only be provided by government and is a non-excludable benefit. For example, national defense. Taxation for that is not confiscation of wealth. It's, well, payment either willingly given or by force, if you want to pay for that protection, national protection. But there's a service given anyways. And it's a service that you're enjoying the defense of the common organization, so it's not something you can exclude yourself from. So taxation is not always forced confiscation of wealth. Taxation taken from some and given to others is, and that's what we should be agreeing on, and that's what we should be agreeing to end. So he goes, when it increases from 62% to 63%, how could any statist, and again I comment that Larken Rose would call Jefferson a statist as well as Hitler, and he would label them as equally evil, which is just ridiculous. And yes, of course, any tax the 62%, 63% that he's referring to, is the redistribution of wealth tax. Any tax for that purpose is foul, obscene, insidious, and you name it. But just because 95% of the taxes are foul, that doesn't mean that 5% don't have a use. And we're going to say, well, we allow the 5%, and then they get into the other 95%. Nah, I don't think so. All right, so then the principle that is missing is that taxes must be limited to costs necessary to enforce rights and not used to violate rights. Now, there are people that say, well, there's a government out there securing rights, but I didn't ask them to do that for me, and they're taking money from me for that, and that's using violence and force against me, and I don't want to clean my room, et cetera, et cetera. There can be no principled objection to robbery unless it's an objection against any level of robbery, even if it's legal. So, but the question is, if somebody gets a benefit such as national defense and doesn't want to pay for it, and doesn't pay for it, then who's doing the robbing? And if the other guys say, hey, we paid for this, you got to pay your share, and we're going to make you, then the anarchist Larken Rose is going to call those guys the robber. I call the other guy who won't pay for the share of the benefit that he received by being a member of the group, and he wanted the burden of that benefit to fall on everybody else but him, is the robber. So the question lies in whether or not the confiscation is not returned in equal value. For example, their eminent domain. The founders knew that government would take people's property for some time to time. That's a foregone conclusion that was going to happen. That's just the way, the nature of the beast. So what did they put in there? They couldn't do it without just compensation. So you could say, yeah, they were robbed, but they were restored. And that's the difference between a government that does use taxes with a forceful collection process, or those few services that only government can handle or do. Now he goes on, either rulers own the people or have the rights to take as much as they please, or the people own themselves and the rulers have no right to forcibly take anything from them. Well, if the people say, 80% of the people say we want to do this thing and we all have to pay a share, then that's not the rulers, Larken, that's the people paying their share and insisting the other 20% who want to be freeloaders pay their share of the non-excludable benefit. Now, I put the people have a right to set up a system to safeguard their rights, and they have a right to collect the cost of this through their representatives. There can be, now this is Larken Rose, there can be no principle anywhere in between. How could there be? What possible rational basis could there be for holding the belief that 40% slavery is good, but 47% slavery is bad? My rebuttal: it's not slavery if the fruits of your labor go only to your survival and not to others. For the fruits of your labor are directly going to you, with a small part being taken that secures your individual right to life, liberty, and property. And because that kind of securing has to be done in a organized in a collective manner for the general welfare, if you will, then that's not theft. But Larken Rose is going to call that theft and slavery, the same as if they're taking it and giving it to somebody else. And again, too bad Larken Rose does not understand that there's only a choice between what form of government we have, and not a choice between government and no government. That is not the choice. That will never be the choice. It is always going to be what form of government. And you could make a little Google search and see that there's all kinds of governments out there. And obviously, we would want a government that maximizes freedom and limits the cost of that. So, and by looking at that, and you look at the book The Law by Frederick Bastiat, he covers that principle quite well. Jefferson covers it in the Declaration of Independence. Governments are instituted among men to secure these rights. That's it. So I'm going to go down to some of the comments in here. After I made that comment, I had some people. Here's a fellow that says, Michael, you're a statist. Now, he's not using the term statist as somebody who believes in a minimal government like Thomas Jefferson, and not so bad. He's using the term statist as if I'm a Hitlerist or a Maoist or Stalinist. And then he calls me a troll, probably a troll. The whole free market operates without government or coercion, and quite nicely, and undoes me, undoes you. Well, the free market in this country, sorry, it's not free, it's ruled and regulated, but I don't know, the free market out there would be people that operate outside of all those rules and regulations and taxes and whatnot. Anybody has a business that does any tax reporting and collecting sales tax, etc., not free market. But anyway, the market operating, the operation of the market is always backed up by force. Now, when there are those that can, when they can steal and cheat by fraud, they'll do it. And due to the fact that the government is there to deal with that issue, that supports the operation of the free market. Now, if the government wasn't there as a backup, and some vendor, somebody cheated me or cheated somebody, then they would operate as their own government, own police force, and those things don't usually end up all that well. And the strongest thieves come by and take what they want. All right, let's go down where someone else makes a comment against me. Here's a guy that slightly agrees with some basic principles that I mentioned, but they need putting in context. I need to point out the error that you made. Having forced money of you is quite simple, a crime. It's not made legitimate by saying it is for so-called services. Why? Because the services cannot possibly be forced. They can only be offered. Well, that's a nice thought, you know, and here's the deal on that. Now, I hope to use a condominium association example again, because I think it's a good example, or it's you know, we could go back to a small government, and an Indian tribe would be just as good. So you got your chiefs, and you got your council, and you got your sergeant of arms and whatnot, and they have they have costs that's involved in securing the tribe. Everybody's going to pay a share of that cost. Now, they can say, well, I don't want to pay that. The anarchist Indian will say, I don't want to pay anything for that. I didn't ask for that service. Well, as ridiculous as that sounds, that's exactly what's happening with the anarchists in our modern day society. And this comment that it's a crime to take from them. Now, there's a contract, an implied consent contract, that you're going to answer to some authority. Just as when you're born into a family, you answer to the authority of your parents. And the smaller the group here, the more that's understood that you're answering to the authority. And, of course, the authority should not get abusive and expect more out of you than what your obligation to your fellows in that community are. So that's not a crime, but if we come down the pike here, and we're so mixed up with all this other polluted taxes and socialist redistribution, I mean, I'm sure there were Indian tribes that made the young folks that worked hard and whatever give up their production to elders and whatnot in a socialist type of thing, and not by voluntarism. And then so that that would be um, something that one could contest, because it is taking from one and giving to another. But when it's taking from one and all the ones for their share of the cost of the securing of the tribe's security, then that is a redistribution of property. So again, that is a system of government. Like the choice is not no government. It's going to be what system. All right. So here's a guy named Eric who takes me on bigger than that. He takes my comments and wants to rebut them. I say there are those who believe in authority and they expect authority to be subject to the same rules as they are. Then he goes on, he replies, Obama and Congress can tax me. Can I tax them? No. Then they're not subject to the same rules that he is. That makes no sense. Of course, they're subject to the same rules as they are. Okay? In other words, if the authority makes a rule, then the authority is also subject to the rule. If the authority, for the authority to be violating it, it's not like if the authority says you have to pay tax for this, then the authority has to pay tax for that too. That'd be subject to the same rules. To say that anybody can go around saying that you got to pay taxes, to me, that example just doesn't. It's oil and water he's throwing out there. And so then he has a comment about my comment about taxation for services are not confiscation of wealth. And again, if they did take your property and gave you something in equal value in return that you could convert to monetary units, then that's not confiscating your wealth. He wants to go on and say taxation is theft, armed robbery, and kidnapping. If you don't pay taxes, you get fined. If you don't pay the fine, you go to jail. If you try to escape from jail, you get shot. There's nothing the government do that can't be funded on a voluntary basis without taxation. And that's just not true. And you can say that all you want. The idea of having a police force, or it's people that this idea that they think that people voluntarily pay for this. If you don't have the bad guys right now, people are not going to say, well, I better pay money for in case the bad guys come. They just don't operate that way. Now he makes a comment from Stephen Kinsella. First, we need to ask ourselves, what is taxation? Well, taxation is theft. Okay. So if somebody wants to say that all taxation is theft, then I guess they're, what do you call, a collectivist. I guess they're in the absolutism, because it isn't. And in fact, you call it fee, or you call it like homeowners association fees. I mean, it's a mandatory fee that people have agreed to. Mandatory fees are the same thing as taxes. And so they're mandatory. It's not theft. It's something that folks have agreed to. So let's see what it says here. Then I go on. I say, he's rebutting my comment. Larken loves to call those that are Hitler or Jefferson out as being the same. And so this guy says they're both statists, for they believe in having a state. One believes in a big state, the other believes in a small state, but either way, they both believe in a state, hence they are statists. Well, at least this guy is using the term as not so pejoratively when a guy is for minimal government. And then, I'd like to have these anarchists define what a state is for me, because I've had discussions and some blank looks when I asked them that question. Now, I put down that people have a right to set up a system to safeguard their rights, and they have a right to collect the costs through the representative. He rebuts that with, yes, but they have no right to impose this system on people who have not given it their express consent through a duly written and signed contract. Well, I'm sorry, that's not the way it works. If 80% of the folks in the community area say, this is what we need to do for our security, and even if the majority is smaller than that, and the cost is borne on everybody equally, and it's for a legitimate function that can't be done individually, cannot be done by government. It's just maybe it's a massive project for the general welfare, and so the community gets together and says, well, we got this project, we're going to bring the water into town so it'll be convenient for everybody, and it'll make all our lives better, it's good for the general welfare, and there'll be a tax that imposed on everybody for X amount. Well, actually, the people would agree to that, but then there'd be a few people that say, no, I don't want to pay that, but they want the water. I didn't agree to the project, but there's the water. It's out there in the open. You know, it's on the common ground. I should just get it. No, sorry. And you can whine all day long and say, well, that's forced taxes out of me. That's slavery. And that's fine. But again, I'm going to end this with, you don't have a choice between government and no government. Your choice is what kind of government. And that's what you ought to be working on, because the choice of no government, think about it, logically you're going to need 99% of the people, maybe 97, that say no government. And watch out for that 3% say they want a government.